Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. We're about a week away from the official beginning of autumn. Is your garden ready for that transition to shorter days, more moderate temperatures, and cool season fruits and vegetables? Today, we talk with 4 master gardeners about several aspects of your backyard paradise. If you're taking out your tomato plants, we have suggestions for what to do with all those tomatoes that are still on the plants. And before you plant your fall and winter vegetables and flowers, we get tips on reinvigorating your soil after you remove your summer crops. Fall is a great time to enjoy what may be the last flush of flowers on your rose bushes. We tell you what you should be doing to them to get them ready for a bloomtastic 2024. Your fruit trees, both the deciduous and evergreen shrubs and trees, need special attention in early autumn to stave off pests and diseases, as well as reinvigorate them for their next harvest. We get the do's and don'ts of fall fruit tree care. And America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, says, check those garden pesticides that have been around for years in your garage. Some of them may be useless or even dangerous. It's all right here in episode number 283, Fall Garden Preparation, and How Long Can You Store Pesticides? We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. We're here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. We are in the vegetable section, and because of the time of the year, as summer transitions into fall, there's a lot of work going on here as the judgment goes on as far as which plants to take out, which plants to keep harvesting. We are talking with Gail Pothauer, vegetable expert extraordinaire, he tried to say. Gail, when it comes to the transition of summer to fall gardening, I think one of the big problems that people have is, I've got all these plants here. Where am I going to plant anything for the fall? Where am I going to put garlic or onions or broccoli or cauliflower? And sometimes you have to make some hard decisions.
Correct. And that's why it's a good idea to actually plan your fall garden when you plan your spring garden. Because then you'll know what will be finished, say, in September, and you can start planning your fall garden. So, if you make a plan ahead of time and know what will come out early so that you can put in your fall garden, or you just bite the bullet and just start taking plants out. Right now I'm cutting back on our melons. We don't want it setting any more fruit because the plants are going to come out. So we want all the energy going into ripening the fruit that's on there, and then we'll take the melons out and we can put in our winter garden.
So when it comes to pruning a plant to stop new production but allow production of the existing plants to continue, what parts do you prune out?
Prune out the new growth and the flowers. So with the melons that I'm doing this morning, we don't want any new fruit to set, so I'm cutting off all the flowers and any new growth. And we do have some melons that are getting pretty close to ripening, maybe in the next week or two. And that's what I want to have ripen in this warm sun that we have still in the summer, and then the plants will come out. And I found that even if you baby the plants into fall, the melons don't tend to have as sweet a flavor because the days are getting shorter. Even though we still have some warm weather, it's not the prolonged heat that we have in summer. So to me, it's not worth it.
After you take out a plant, but before you put in a new plant, what do you do with the soil?
We put in some Nutri-Rich. That happens to be the fertilizer of our choice. It's a pelleted chicken manure, but put in any kind of good organic fertilizer to replenish the soil because the summer crops have been heavy feeders and they've done a lot all through the hot summer, so they've depleted the soil. So you need to put in some kind of fertilizer. Compost would be good. If you have worm castings, you could do that as well. Or you could even grow a cover crop. Something that grows quickly, like buckwheat, grows in about 5 weeks. If you planted it now, this is early September, then by October, you'd cut that down, incorporate that. So that's another thing you can do to help get your soil kind of some nutrients.
When it comes to any cover crop, though, you do want to cut it down before it flowers too much. Maybe when you first start seeing flowers appear, that's when you start weed whacking it back and let it lay on the surface of the soil, or you can work it in or top it with some compost and mulch.
Yeah, and buckwheat grows so fast and it's so tender that it breaks down really fast. Some of the winter cover crops are real thick and it's a little more difficult for them to decompose. But buckwheat grows fast. You certainly want to cut it down just as it's flowering, because if it goes to seed, which it will in the next week, it becomes a weed. And when it's flowering, that's when the plant is most nutritious, so that's when you want to cut it down.
Explain to people why buckwheat. Why are you incorporating a living plant into the soil?
Well, one thing about buckwheat is it pulls up phosphorus, and which isn't very mobile in the soil, so that's good for that. It does have a taproot, so it helps break up the soil a bit. But it just provides a lot of organic matter when you do cut it down and turn it into the soil.
Would imagine, too, there's nitrogen involved.
Right. And especially if the plant is still green. If you let it dry on the surface, not so much, but you could use it as a mulch if you did that. Let it dry on the surface. It takes the place of straw or some other mulch you could use.
Now, you mentioned about using a fertilizer. Does it have to be a granular fertilizer, or can you use a liquid fertilizer?
Well, we generally use a liquid fertilizer to supplement the nutrition throughout the growing season. We like to use a granular that we incorporate into the soil. If you do something that's organic, it's going to have small numbers like 4-3-3 instead of 16-16-16. Use the fertilizer of your choice. We choose to do an organic type fertilizer.
Well, that's important, too, about the single numbers that you're going to see on any bag or box of fertilizer. You're going to see 3 numbers that represent nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And plants don't need a whole heck of a lot. They just need those single digits. Like the 4-3-4 you mentioned would be 4% nitrogen, 3% phosphorus, 4% potassium.
Right. And cool season crops aren't quite the heavy feeders that the summer crops are. The summer crops really take a beating. They have hot weather, windy and dry soil, so they really need to have the soil prepared well before you plant them. Cool season aren't quite as picky, but still it's a good idea to incorporate some kind of organic matter and some fertilizer.
I think the big takeaway from this is after you remove your summer crops, don't immediately start planting your fall flowers and vegetables. Help the soil.
Right. And at home, I've done that. I took my beans out a month ago. They were pretty much pooped out. So then I amend the soil, getting ready to plant my carrots in that particular spot. If you do incorporate any kind of fertilizer or a cover crop, you do want to let it decompose a little while before you plant.
And I would think, too, water it in.
Water it in for sure, yeah.
Well, we've got some tips on how to transition our gardens from summer into fall. Gail Poth, our master gardener here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. She's a Sacramento County master gardener. Gail, thanks for the good advice.
Anytime, Fred.
I've told you about Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planters. They're sold worldwide. Smart Pots are proudly made 100% right here in the USA. They're BPA-free and lead-free, making them safe for growing vegetables and other edibles. Well, the folks at Smart Pots have added a new product to their lineup, perfect for building the healthiest soil imaginable for your garden by composting. It's the Smart Pot Compost Sack, a large 100-gallon fabric bag that's lightweight yet extremely durable and lasts for years. It can hold 12 cubic feet of pure compost. This rugged fabric is entirely porous, containing many micropores that allow for air circulation and drainage. It's easy to start a compost pile with the Smart Pot Compost Sack. Just open the sack, set it on level ground, and start adding your compostable materials, grass clippings, vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, and more, as well as fallen leaves, straw, and shredded paper. Next, place the optional cover over the sack. That's all there is to it. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. You can find the location nearest you at their website, and you can buy it online from Smart Pots. Just visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part, because on that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED, F-R-E-D. Do it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots' lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers and their new compost sack. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. It's Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. We are here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. We're finding out fall garden chores as we transition from summer into fall. What should you be doing in the various parts of your garden? We're in the orchard section here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center with Master Gardener Quentin Young. On your list of things to do this time of year in September and October, and we should point out that the orchard here has a wide variety of fruit trees, and there's also a citrus orchard as well. What is at the top of your list as far as things to do this time of year?
So for our deciduous fruit trees, we're actually trying to wrap up most of our summer pruning. We want to get that done usually no later than about October.
Summer pruning, what you're doing is maintaining height control, but you're probably also, if you're doing it as late as October, you're cutting off some buds.
We are cutting off some buds, but that also helps us with fruit thinning later, but it's also helping us keep the canopies open, depending on the tree and the style of tree that we want to prune it into. But yeah, that's all good stuff that we try to get that done before fall.
For people who are unfamiliar with the concept of summer pruning, it's fairly new, maybe popular the last 20, 30 years or so, but it really gives you a good opportunity to get in there to control the height of the tree.
Yeah, so what we try to get across to the public with a backyard orchard is you really want your fruit trees to roughly be 6 to 8 feet tall so that you can get up there, you can pick the fruit by hand, maybe use a little step stool, but you're not having to get up there with a commercial-sized ladder up to that 20-foot range to pick fruit, because usually at that height, if you don't get it, the rats and the birds do.
What about watering? Do they need as much water? I mean, here we are in September. There are still warm days, but they're shorter days. Should the watering be adjusted accordingly?
Yeah, especially after harvest, we usually reduce the watering by about 50%.
And then probably when the rainy season starts, if you live in an area that has a rainy season like we do here in California.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Yeah, and then we'll just cut it off completely. Right. And we'll hope for another rainy winter like we had last year.
Now, there are some here in California, especially in agricultural areas, if they're growing walnuts or almonds, permanent crops, if you will, and pistachios too, they may have to water year-round.
Yeah, depending on how good of a rainy winter we have, yeah.
Now, over in the adjunct area where the citrus trees are, where you have a long row of various citrus, and they all develop fruit at different times. And if you're in an area where you're growing citrus, you may see green fruit on there now. And on others, you don't see any. Should you be worried?
Well, it depends on what it is. You know, like some of your mandarins and satsumas, they're going to be alternate bearing. So if you had a great crop last year, you probably won't get a good crop this year. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. We do go through and do a little bit of fruit thinning, but right now, keeping in mind the citrus pruning, we sort of shape them throughout the year. We're getting rid of water sprouts. And then we're also raising up some of the lower branches, anticipating rain that might be splashing fungal spores back up into the branches.
It's very important, too, and to maintain a layer of mulch under the trees as well, I would think.
Definitely, yeah. We do a really nice thick layer of wood chips here. We pretty much put those down usually almost every workday. And if you come to the horticulture center, you'll see. But yeah, definitely a nice layer of mulch.
Is there a season when you should not be pruning citrus trees?
Oddly, no. You know, some people say, oh, don't prune right before the winter because you might get a cold snap that takes out some of the tender new growth. But I found that it doesn't really affect the overall performance of the tree.
So you can prune year-round, and what you're saying is basically you're just maintaining the size of the tree. But is that shaping heading cuts or thinning cuts?
It depends on the tree. Some of them are going to be heading cuts if they're rubbing or if we want to open up the interior. You'll notice that, like, we have a grapefruit tree that's under an oak tree. It tends to be fairly dark, so we try to keep the center open because it always gets cottony cushion scale. So those would be thinning cuts. And then the heading cuts are usually just along the top of the citrus. You'll see we try to keep them at fence height, so if we decide that we're going to cover them in the winter, they're really easy to cover with frost cloth.
Here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center, it's adjacent to a community garden here in Fair Oaks Park, and I'm staring at one heck of a tall banana plant.
It's been really nice to see. Yeah. And we actually are going to probably do 2 bananas here in the orchard. I have them at home right now. I'll probably babysit them over the winter this year before we bring them out next year.
If people want to try growing banana plants in USDA Zone 9, you really are at the mercy of the weather. And you'll probably get winter dieback, but it's not fatal.
No, it's not fatal. The main thing you want to do is give them really good drainage because they will be susceptible to crown rot in our heavy, cold, wet clay soil. So amend really well, and we're going to probably even try maybe one of them in a wine barrel.
Ooh, well, that would be hopefully not too big.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, because that one over there is probably a good 15 feet already.
All right, as we transition from summer to fall, don't ignore your fruit trees. There's still lots to do. When would you feed your citrus trees and your deciduous fruit trees, or do you even bother doing that if you're maintaining a 4-inch layer of mulch?
We don't feed our deciduous fruit trees except for any fruit tree we have in a barrel. We feed every month, which I would recommend also for citrus trees in containers. The only trees that we really feed here are the citrus trees in the ground, and we usually feed them in April when the ground warms up, and we use blood meal and Nutri-Rich.
All right, that's the second time today I've heard about Nutri-Rich. We'll have a link for Nutri-Rich, which is pelleticized chicken manure.
Yeah, and I think the numbers are like 3-2-1. It's about 7% calcium, I think. It's organic, it won't burn, and you can use it pretty much for everything.
It ain't cheap.
Well, actually, a 50-pound bag, maybe $20.
Oh, that's cheap.
Yeah, around $20 depending on where you get it. But yeah, it's heavy, but it lasts a long time.
Again, we'll have a link to that in the show notes. Quentin Young here at the Orchard at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Fred.
Are you thinking of growing fruit trees? Maybe you already are, but you want to know more about them. Well, you probably have a million questions, like which fruit trees will grow where I live? What are the tastiest fruits? When's harvest time? How do I care for these trees? The good news is the answers are all nearby. Just go to davewilson.com, click on the Home Garden tab at the top of the page. And in that Home Garden tab, you're going to find a link to their fruit and nut harvest chart so you can be picking delicious, healthy fruits from your own yard for a long growing season. Here in USDA Zone 9, that could be May through December. And you're just a click away with the informative YouTube video series at davewilson.com. As part of that video series, they'll walk you through the simple process of using the Dave Wilson website to find their trees either at a nearby local nursery or at a mail order source. That's Dave Wilson Nursery, the nation's largest grower of fruit trees for the backyard garden. They've got planting tips, taste test results, and information about their revolutionary backyard orchard culture techniques. That'll explain how you can have a cornucopia of different fruit trees in a small backyard. Your harvest to better health begins at davewilson.com. We're at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. They're having a workshop on this Saturday, and it's a Saturday that is a transition season. It's mid-September, and soon fall will be here. The weather is still warm, but it's going to cool off. So we got to think about fall garden chores. We are with Anita Clevenger in the perennial plant section. Anita has been a master gardener since 2002, but you're a rose expert. What needs to be done with roses this time of year? I bet you can get, here in California, in USDA Zone 9, you can at least get one more good bloom, if not two more good blooms out of it. But how do you prepare your roses for winter?
The first thing to do is keep on deadheading. As you said, you can have roses once or twice more, and right now we are having a fall flush. Early September often is the roses begin to wake up and bloom again. I keep on deadheading to encourage it. At some point, though, you'll stop, and if those fruit develop on the end of the canes, that's actually the whole point of the rose flower. That is the rose seed pod, also known as a hip. And you can allow those hips to develop. It won't hurt the rose, but the rose will stop blooming because it's done its job. It is blooming to reproduce. So once those hips have been developed, the rose will take a break. And you do want them to take a break because the roses in our climate don't know when to quit. And so you want to prune them when they're as dormant as possible. And often they're not very dormant. I prune after the holidays, between Christmas and the Valentine's Day, we say is the cutoff. So what you want to do is have the roses slow down. And so at some point you stop deadheading, you allow the hips, if the rose is going to be one to develop it, you allow it to develop. And if you're going to fertilize, I would do it about now and not Again, if you didn't fertilize all summer, this is a good time to give them a little bit more. Frankly, I don't fertilize my roses, which is not perhaps in the spring. I put down some compost, do a little bit. I don't do a periodic one, but to boost the flowers and for rose health, you can do it. But I wouldn't do it later than the end of this month.
Yeah, the benefit of using compost or mulch beneath even ornamental plants is it's slowly feeding the soil year-round, and there's no need to add extra fertilizer.
That's correct. And I also put down alfalfa, and there have been some scientific studies that say it will produce some additional new canes, what they call basal breaks, so canes from the soil. And there is scientific research that has documented that. And so I also, after I prune, I put down fresh compost, I put down alfalfa pellets. I might do some organic fertilizer also. So in the spring, I get them ready to go. And then all I do the rest of the year is just to keep them weeded. Pick up if you've got any diseased leaves, and generally this time of year disease is less of a problem, but picking those off of the plant and picking them up from the soil is also a good idea.
We've also already experienced a little bit of rain in our area. It wasn't very much, but as September becomes October and November, we could see a gully washer or two, and then you really do have to be serious about getting out there and cleaning up.
That's true. Yeah, and you'll see maybe some spots or some blotches on your roses, and that's actually a disease known as botrytis, and you don't want that to land on the soil either, so you want to clean that up.
And speaking of how these diseases spread, which is by water, I would hope that most rose growers, or if you have rose plants, they're not getting hit directly by an overhead sprinkler from the lawn.
In California, where we're so dry, overhead watering on roses, I think, generally has little problem and has some benefits. Through the summer, when you have spider mites and the roses get dusty, that and hot, that and stressed, that is a period when the spider mites move in. And the best treatment to remove spider mites is to wash off the foliage, keep them clean and moisture. You just want to do it in the morning so things can dry out. In the spring, people ask me, what do you do for aphids? I squish them and spray them. And generally, one hand squishing, one hand spraying, I knock them off with water. I don't spray with anything but water. And those are fragile little bugs, and you maybe leave a few for the beneficial insects and the birds to feed on. But water spray really isn't as damaging as you might think, but you don't want them wet overnight.
Well, as we're fond of saying, all gardening is local, so it really depends on your humidity levels. So if you live in an area that has a higher humidity level, including coastal California, and you're trying to grow roses, maybe readjust your lawn sprinklers.
That's correct. But again, it is local, and I have found that most rose books really aren't specific to California, and so what you're reading is advice even for England or for the Midwest, the rest of the country. It's very different here. This is a great climate for roses.
I'll put in a plug for my friend Lance Walheim, who has written several books about rose growing that can be found usually on used book lists, and he is a California rose grower and has lots of good advice for California rose growers if you're looking, as well as the varieties that may do better here than elsewhere.
I'm an old rose grower, not a modern rose grower. The only modern rose I have is Mr. Lincoln, which is about as old as I am. Yeah. So it's not that modern a rose. And you can't see me, but there's a lot of gray hair and wrinkles. But I grow things like the Pearl d'Or that we have here in the demonstration garden that is a spray polyantha. It's a relative of Cecile Bruner. It's in the same type of rose. I often have other, like bourbon roses and other roses, tea roses that are still growing. Some years I'm only able to find a few blooms to put into my Thanksgiving bouquet, and some years I have 20. I'm growing old roses.
As a tomato grower, it's always nice to have the tomatoes on the dinner table for Thanksgiving, but I wouldn't want to show them what the plant looks like in the last week of November, and I would think that the same might be true with roses.
Well, my roses look pretty good still then. Again, because I grow the old roses, and they're more of a shrub rose. They're a landscape shrub in addition to a flowering plant.
From the top of your head, some of the best old roses to grow?
I already mentioned Pearl d'Or and Cecile Brunner. I love many.
Do you recommend Cecile Brunner?
I do, as a climber. It is, as we talked about it before I was on air with you, it's a rampant once bloomer generally, but you can find a shrub or a spray version of it. In my garden, I'm thinking, what do I really love? I love the China roses that are more twiggy and they bloom. They're basically evergreen and ever blooming. And so one rose that I really love is called Archduke Charles. And many of these old roses, you have to go online to order. We no longer have them plant sales here generally where they're being sold.
Well, since you gave me that wide opening, I will mention that until October 30th, if you go to heirloomroses.com and in the checkout coupon box, if you enter the code FRED20, you will get 20% off your purchase. But that's only till the end of October of 2023.
And they grow many old roses. In fact, they started out as heirloom old garden roses. And they pride themselves that their roses are on their own roots, which is a good way to grow many of the old roses. So, yes, I'm glad that you've got that deal going.
Anita, nice talking with you. Nice to see you. Anita Clevenger, Master Gardener with the Sacramento County Master Gardeners. We're here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center in the beautiful perennial garden where there are some old roses.
There are, which we're put in with my advice and another of the volunteers that loves them. We actually have 3 kinds here, 2 of which are UC Davis Valley All-Stars. So when they're recommending what to plant in modern gardens, they're looking to the old roses.
We'll have a link to the UC Davis, I guess it's the Arboretum All-Stars.
It is.
Anita, thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the best soil amendments to add for happy plants are worm castings, also known as worm poop. However, the price of a bag of worm castings is now approaching $20, so you may want to tack on a new to-do item for the soil in your garden. Do-it-yourself vermicomposting, which is raising worms, usually in a worm bin. Those worms will feast on many of your kitchen scraps, giving you back a soil amendment that's teeming with microbial activity, perfect for your plants and plant roots to enjoy. So we're talking worms and worm bins in the latest Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter. And if the worms in your vermiculture system could talk, what would they be telling you this time of year as fall approaches? Master Gardener Susan Muckey, the Worm Whisperer, passes along their entreaties in the podcast portion of the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter. If you're already a subscriber, it's probably in your email waiting for you right now. Or you can start your own subscription. It's free. Find the link to the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast in today's show notes, and you can find it on the Substack app. Or you can sign up at the newsletter link at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. We're in sort of a transition period as far as weather goes. As summer sort of melds into fall, the days are still warm, sometimes hot, but there will be cooling, and we have to think about fall garden chores. One of those fall garden chores that you could be accomplishing now is tearing out the unproductive vegetable plants from your current garden, the warm season crops, in order to prep the soil to put in the cool season crops or the cool season ornamentals. Kathy Morrison is here. We are at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. Kathy is a master gardener, excellent cook, one of the editors and writers with the Sacramento Digs Gardening newsletter, where there is a recipe using homegrown produce every Sunday, but the newsletter comes out every day. They're busy people. I've been casing my garden, Kathy, looking at the tomato plants that have been unproductive, basically giving them grades from A through F, and I think this weekend I will be pulling out the F ones and reworking that soil. But there's still tomatoes on them. What can I do with some of those tomatoes or peppers or zucchini or whatever?
You can freeze them. If they're ripe and you want to tear it out, you can freeze them. Certainly peppers, you can freeze just about any level of ripeness. Tomatoes, I've pulled off green tomatoes and made chutney with them. If you want to, if there's a tomato plant you really just got to get rid of, but there's just enough on there. I think it was a Juliet, if you remember, that they last forever, and then winter comes and you got to get rid of the plant. So yeah, that makes a really nice chutney. But yeah, some of them are just flat unproductive, and some have quit for the summer. And we've got 2 weeks of summer left, but they've taken an early break. I have a couple of heirlooms that are just like done that I'm slowly hacking back because they're all wrapped around a couple other tomato plants. And I want to put my garlic in soon. So I need some space. I tend to fill up the whole garden during the summer, and then it's like, oh dear, I need space for the garlic. I'm working on that, definitely.
Let's talk about freezing tomatoes. You mentioned that. What sort of preparation is needed before you freeze tomatoes?
Well, wash them. I core them. You look for any bruises or anything that might be a problem. And I tend to cut them up if they're regular, like slicer-sized tomatoes. I'll cut them into quarters or halves, depending on the size. I put them in a freezer plastic bag. You can also use a plastic container. Those tend to take up room. Freezing tomatoes has one big benefit is when you take them out and defrost them, the skins come right off. So you don't have to worry about taking the skins off ahead of time. You can just throw them in there. And cherry tomatoes you can freeze just the way they are. As long as, give them a wash and throw them in there. I do this when I don't have time to can them. It helps.
All right, but when you're freezing tomatoes, you just can't take a fresh, juicy tomato, slice it up, and put it in a bag and freeze it. I guess you could, but don't you have to sort of pre-freeze it first, maybe on a cookie sheet?
Yeah, if you want to use them individually, yes. It's better to freeze them on a cookie sheet. I use a piece of parchment paper, put the tomatoes on that, especially if you want to do slices or something, and then they don't freeze into a solid mass. If you don't mind the solid mass... I've done that just as a hurried thing where they end up in a block of ice and you just defrost it and then throw it all in a stew. That works fine. But yeah, if you do want to use them individually, I definitely recommend. And that goes for anything: peppers, berries, fruit slices, anything. Just lay it out on a baking sheet. Like I said, I like to use parchment paper, and they all freeze individually, and then you can put them in the bag.
You could even vacuum seal them at that point.
You could vacuum seal them if you have a vacuum sealer, yes.
Now, I know at our house we like to put them in bags that are maybe 1-quart bags. That's a perfect serving for 2 people like that. But my wife also goes through the wonderful aromatic process of roasting the tomatoes.
Oh, roasted tomatoes are wonderful. That's another easy way to get the skins off them. I did a whole batch of roasted tomato sauce earlier, actually August, and it's just heaven to have. Wonderful flavor.
Do you need a convection oven to roast them?
Oh, heavens no. just a working oven and a bunch of pans. More parchment paper, though, definitely, because it comes off easier and they don't stick to the pan.
And the temperature for roasting, it's pretty low.
Well, you can do it a couple of different ways. I tend to do it higher. I tend to do like 425 or 375. Depends on how big the tomatoes are. I would go a little lower for some things like cherries. Juliet's, again, they roast beautifully. You can also do it low and slow. It just depends on how long you want to keep that oven on.
Yeah, what ovens go down to what, 150 or 200?
I think 180 is the lowest on mine. 180, 170. Those are for drying, and I've dried them overnight too at that level, which is also a wonderful thing to do.
So. Oh yeah, dehydrating is wonderful.
Yeah, and I don't have a dehydrator, so it's like, trust me, the oven's going to stay on, but you wake up to this wonderful smell.
What is the difference in timing between slow and fast as far as roasting them in the oven?
Oh, roasting them, if it's a big pan of slicers, I would say 35, 40 minutes. Cherries are about 25 minutes. You want to get them just so that the skins are just starting to brown, and then they come off really. You pull them off with tongs. You pull the tongs off, and then you've got this lovely mass of roasted tomatoes.
That's it when you're roasting at about 400?
Yeah, it's about 400. My oven tends to go up a little high after 400, so sometimes I'll knock it down. It depends on what you've got in front of you.
I know my wife Jeannie has mastered the art of doing 2 trays at the same time in the oven, but halfway through the drying process, she'll rotate the pans.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That works for anything. That works for cookies, because if everybody's got hot spots in their oven, so that helps a lot.
All right. Well, there you go. That's what you can do with those leftover tomatoes. Maybe you've got a few per plant and you want to take out a few plants, and maybe you have now a couple of cookie trays full of tomato slices that you can do something with, and certainly you can keep them. And even if the tomato isn't ripened, if it started to change color, you can take those tomatoes, put them in a cool, dark spot on your kitchen counter, should be dark, and wait for them to ripen up a bit, and you can ripeness of a kitchen counter ripened tomato doesn't really have the full color of an outdoor tomato, but you can squeeze it, and if you got a little bit of give to it, you're ready to go.
Absolutely. I've done that when I've had to go someplace, and I know that I better get these off the plant now and let them sit out, and then when we get back, they're ready to go.
All right, we're transitioning gardens from summer into fall. Kathy Morrison, Sacramento County Master Gardener. We're here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. Kathy, thanks for the good tips, and I hope everybody reads Sacramento Digs Gardening.
Oh, thanks, Fred. Thanks for having me. Have a good fall.
The current flashback episode of the week is one of our most listened to episodes, and for a very good reason. It features a wide-ranging discussion with nationally famous TV gardener Joe Lample. It's about his book, The Vegetable Gardening Book. But we also venture into the warm season garden when he talks about his upscale tomato cages, which are built to last forever and look good. Give it a listen. It's episode 236 from September of 2022, Joe Lample, Vegetable Gardening. Find a link to it in today's show notes or at the podcast player of your choice. And you can find it at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. Debbie Flower is here. We're answering your garden questions here on the Garden Basics podcast. And we get a question from somebody from somewhere. Come on, folks. If you're going to send in a question, give me a name. I don't care what you call yourself. You can make up whatever name you want. If you've always wanted to be called Jimmy, great. Call yourself Jimmy. But at least give us a little bit of accuracy as far as where do you live. I don't want your street address. Maybe just the county. Maybe just the town. Thank you. I'm done. Now, for the question. Hi, Farmer Fred. I learned the hard way once about squash vine borer and have been using BT ever since. As I understand it, BT is a living bacterium. So my question is, how long can I reasonably expect a bottle of BT spray to be effective? And what about the mix-it-yourself BT granules? The bacterium can't live forever on a shelf, or can it? The bottom line is, can I use last year's supply, or is it time to buy more? Good question. That will take us down many scenic routes on this question, especially with dealing with organic pesticides that generally are living, breathing things.
Right.
And BT is a living, breathing thing.
Yes, it is.
It's a bacteria.
Yes.
And
it comes in a liquid form, and it comes in a powder.
How can it come in a powder? How can a living thing come in a powder?
Well, it has what do bears do in the winter?
Hibernate.
Yes, sort of a hibernation form. A spore that is a resting stage, and when you put it in a liquid, it becomes back to life. It comes out of its hibernation.
All right, and I've never dealt with the powdered form. I always had a bottle of BT.
Oh, I always use the powdered kind.
Okay, all right. So we both have had experience with BT. I think the first thing you need to do anytime you buy, especially an organic pesticide like BT, is write the date on the label that you bought it.
Excellent practice.
Now, you may not know when it was manufactured, but at least you have a reference as far as to how long it lasts. So in 5 years, when you reach into the back of the garden chemical closet and there's this bottle of BT and you don't know when it is, you don't judge it by opening it and smelling it.
No. Bad practice.
Yeah, that's a bad practice. The other thing, too, is when you throw away old garden chemicals, don't dig a hole and just dump it all in the hole. Don't do that.
No, my niece, who is a pharmacist, has talked about, and she's talking about medical chemicals, but this I think would apply to pesticides too, is pour the liquids into kitty litter and mix it up and then put it in the trash.
That's interesting.
The government would like you to use it, spray it out, mix it up, go to whatever crop is labeled it is to be used on, and spray it out, because the solution to pollution is dilution.
How long have you known that?
My father was a professor of environmental science.
It had an age to it.
A long time.
The solution to pollution is dilution.
It doesn't become a problem until there's too much of it all in one place.
All right. And maybe your community has a pesticide day.
That's what I do. I keep a box in the garage underneath all the shelves, and for household chemicals, paints. I was going to clean the couch, and I had this spray bottle of upholstery cleaner, and it wouldn't work. Stuff like that. Right. That shouldn't go in the garbage, shouldn't go in the landfill, because landfills leak, and take them to your community collection of toxic chemicals.
storing pesticides like BT, which is a organism, I would think it would want to be in a cool, dry place.
Yes, not in the garage.
Not in the garage. So between like 40 and 85 degrees.
That sounds like a good range, yeah.
All right.
Don't want it to freeze and don't want it to get so hot it will volatilize or die for the organics.
This is why everybody needs a root cellar.
Yeah, unfortunately we don't have them here in California.
Yeah, for things like that. How long does BT last? You look up various labels of BT and it varies, but I think on average, a year and a half?
You're right,
maybe.
Year and a half. There's some rules of thumb about pesticide use. One is to store in a cool, dry place, ideally between 50 and 60 degrees. Good luck finding that around here. But the 40 to 85, that's a good one as well. That's good for plants. But you don't want it in your garage in winter or in a very hot summer. Below freezing and above 90 will definitely shorten the effectiveness of your pesticide. Liquid formulations perish before powder type, so the granule of BT will last a little bit longer, maybe 2 years. And that's the rule of thumb, is 2 years in pesticides, that they are effective per the label use for about 2 years. And then you don't want to use them anymore. Some of them actually get stronger over time, and many get weaker over time. That's when you want to take them to your local disposal. So when buying pesticide, buy only what you need now.
Do liquid formulations have a sooner expiration date than powdered forms?
In some cases, yes.
All right. So you have to take that into consideration, too. And I'm being corrected by one BT label that says store between 39 and 68 degrees. Good luck doing that in California.
Right.
Unless you live in San Francisco. To ensure microbial purity and potency, use product within 18 months of the date of manufacture. Store container upright and keep tightly closed when not in use. After extended storage, shake or stir contents to assure a uniform suspension.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever you are, from wherever you are, who wrote us this question, you said that you learned the hard way once about squash vine borer, have been using BT ever since. I don't think you're killing any squash vine borers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Squash vine borers lay their eggs inside the stem of the squash vine, typically right where it comes out of the ground. So right when the borers hatch and start feeding, they're feeding on the oldest tissue and the whole plant's going to go down. The BT works only when the smallest caterpillars eat it. So I don't know how you're going to get it to the smallest caterpillar. There are people I've read about who inject it into the stem, but it's not on the label of the pesticide to do that. And the label is the law. You have to use the pesticide in the manner it is stated on the label, or you are breaking the law. Typically means it's not effective that way anyway.
And we say this a lot, and we'll keep saying it. Read and follow all label directions.
Yep.
And don't assume anything about the label. Don't assume that label lists many pests, that the pest you're trying to kill is, even though it's not on the label, it'll kill that too. No, it won't. It'll be on the label if it will work.
Right.
So you want to match the product to two things, the pest you're going to kill and the plant you're going to apply it to.
Yes.
So both the plant and the pest have to be listed on the label.
Sometimes there will be generalizations like shrubs in landscape situations. Okay. So that covers a lot of things.
My favorite is try on a small piece before doing the whole thing.
Yes.
Thanks.
So to control those squash vine borers, it's better to have, they're flying in, their parents are flying in. So to use a floating row cover when you first plant the plant over it, secure it down so that the adult can't find the plant, won't lay any eggs in it. And when the plant is big enough and starts to flower, you must remove that floating row cover so that the pollinators can get to the flowers and you will get squash.
Will that plant be big and strong enough to repel a flying insect that is laying eggs?
That's a good question. Hopefully the flying insect isn't around at that time of year.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Good luck on
right.
that. But, now, what about spinosad? Would spinosad work in a situation like this?
I believe it is labeled for it. I don't know the directions.
Read and follow all label directions.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
That's very important. So we've told you, sir, ma'am, whoever you are, wherever you are, that BT lasts about 18 months. And it doesn't work on squash vine borers.
Right.
Have a good day. All right. Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome, Fred.
The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast comes out once a week on Fridays. Plus, the newsletter podcast that comes with the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter continues, and that will also be released on Fridays. Both are free, and they're brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. The Garden Basics podcast is available wherever podcasts are handed out, and that includes our homepage, gardenbasics.net. And that's where you can also sign up for the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast. That's gardenbasics.net, or you can use the links in today's show notes. And thank you so much for listening.